Well, we'll start knowing that people will continue to stream in, and also that the recording will be available as well. I'm Riyad Bahour. I'm coordinator for the Global Studies program, and I teach history and global studies here at Sac City. I'm happy to welcome you to Reimagining the Future Earth and Global Justice Days at SCC. Our goal with this program is to, after 2 years into this pandemic that hopefully is on its way out, our goal is to reconnect to our communities, both locally and globally, and to invite people to learn about the rich world around us and to consider Sac City your educational home, and to consider coming and taking one of the dazzling array of courses we offer and meeting our dedicated faculty and our great students as well. The theme for today is Sustainable Futures. Today's session with our special guest, Andrea, is the last session of the day. And we have another day next week on the 28th under the theme of global justice with a full day of programming. So if you register for today, you'll be able to attend next week. Speaking of our amazing dedicated faculty, I'm happy to introduce one of our best, Professor Alexandria White, who teaches writing in our Lang & Lit department, who will introduce our special guest today.
Welcome, everybody. I'm here to introduce Andréia Coutinho Louback, who is passionate about social justice and has 10 years of experience in communication studies. Andrea is a Humphrey Fellow at UC Davis, which is a taxpayer-funded initiative of the U.S. Department of State. She has a master's degree in ethnic racial relations at the Federal Institute of Technology and a bachelor's degree in journalism from Pontifical Catholic University based out of Rio. Currently, she works as a consultant and specialist on climate justice for different organizations in Brazil. Andrea has worked directly with the United Nations and traveled all over the world to places like Madrid, Spain, Glasgow, Ireland, and California as a climate justice journalist, educator, and activist. In Brazil, she is a spokesperson for several different initiatives about how climate justice intersects with gender, race, and class. She uses her research, expertise, and leadership to be an environmental justice advocate for Brazil's most vulnerable populations. It is with great excitement that I turn over the stage to this wonderful human being and global citizen, Andréia Coutinho Louback.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen with you to make my presentation more visible for all of you. So everybody's seeing my screen. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. All the opportunities I have to speak about my country, to speak about what's going on in Brazil, and to speak about all challenges and climate solutions that we are fighting for. It's a great honor to me. So thank you so much for the invite, and thank you all of you for separating time to be here and learning together and thinking ahead together for a sustainable future. So who needs climate justice in Brazil is the title of my presentations. And I'm always trying to answer this question in everything I do, everything I write, and every movement that I'm dedicating time, because Brazil has lots of social challenges right now. We are fighting against the violence, we are fighting against the climate disasters, we are fighting against people that are suffering with poverty, but who really needs about climate justice in Brazil? And today I just want to introduce some scenarios and how we are far or close to the solutions or to the sustainable world that we are in a local level and in a global level playing to. So I want to, let me pass. So I want to thank you, Alex, again for introducing myself. I just want to add some details in my self-introduction. So I'm from Rio in Brazil. I'm not sure how many of you have the chance to go to Brazil previously. I was born in Rio, and now I'm based on California in Davis for a Humphrey Fellowship experience, amazing experience that I'm living since August. And my goal here is attended to a mid-career professional program that provides me academic enrichment, and at the same time a professional experience, and lots of amazing connections, lots of amazing learnings that for this 10 months we are able to experience with other 12 fellows, other 11 fellows across the world. So being a Fulbrighter is providing me lots of new challenges on climate justice. And when I mean new challenge, I mean because the US, it's a place that inspired Brazil in the past about climate justice. Before Katrina, I think we as a country, we were aware about the climate challenge, but the Katrina hurricane brought lots of Brazilians here to study about climate environmental injustice, and also to help when Katrina happened some years ago. So I think the US inspired us in terms of environmental justice. And as a big country, so what are the challenges what we are facing right now according to our home country reality? So this is a very interesting reflection that I'm doing here, how the US is facing climate injustice and how Brazil is being inspired by the US and shaping their own solutions, they're shaping their own critical reflections according to the scenario that we are living right now. So in a very brief overview, what I'm going to try to cover here with you is how justice is centered on climate justice. Again, I can imagine if you are participating of all the events before, you already learned and heard about some definitions, but I want to bring some more and to present some very recent climate disasters in Rio de Janeiro, where I'm from, and why there is no climate justice without racial justice, and how the communications is one of the key of the solutions, why I believe that, and how can we play that. So I'm always wondering what unifies us in every place I go and every opportunity. So what connects us across the world? And I think now we have three answers, because we are living multiple crises together. We are living the COVID crisis, we are living the climate crisis, and we are also living a conflict crisis in Ukraine. So we are in a global overall. So we have lots of challenges in terms of climate, and we are still playing some challenges in terms of COVID, and how all these crises are connected, what they have, what are the connections, and in which level we are right now in terms of the solutions. So in terms of COVID, my home country is still fighting against lots of people that are not vaccinated so far, and we still have a rate of death. But even though we advanced a lot since I came here, so I had the pleasure to be vaccinated here, but in terms of climate, we are still struggling with lots of things that happened this year. I'm gonna talk soon. And so how all this crisis it's a intergeneration issue. It's like a racial issue, a gender issue, how all these oppressions are working together and making all this crisis much bigger. And I'm saying about Brazil, I'm representing Brazil here today, but it's not just our challenge. So the COVID, the climate, and also the conflict that we are living and we are watching right now. So our main challenge, and I think what unifies us right here, maybe climate change is a global concern, because we are all fighting for social justice and for a greater good in the future. So when I started to work with climate justice, I had some disappointments with the climate movement, because I didn't see lots of representation. I didn't see Black women talking about climate change. And also every time that we were talking about solutions, we were just reducing the Black population to vulnerable, the most vulnerable population. Who are the most vulnerable people? And this was causing lots of uncomfortable situations for me, because I was seeing how the invisibility was acting in terms of climate change, how the spaces of climate change were dominated by men and white men, and don't bring forefront communities to speak and to propose solutions. This was a very, it's a current problem we didn't overcome right now. But when I started to work with climate justice, I was just trying to focus on climate reparations, representations, and participation. So how these three key things could help the climate movement, especially in Brazil, connect all the impacts of climate change centered on a justice perspective. And so we had a great work together because Brazil, it's a place with lots of climate problems. And what we have of special, it's 5 regions with lots of different geographies and lots of different climate problems in terms of in the Northeast, we have another weather, and in the Southeast, we have another weather right now. And so how the disasters are happening in different scales and bring different problems to the 5 regions. So climate justice allows us to think that's not just an environmental problem, it's an economical issue, it's a political issue, and also a developmental issue. So how all these oppressions work together, and to understand that, I like to show the intersectionality tools that shows us how the oppressions work together. We cannot just talk about a gender perspectives or a race perspectives, all the factors, religion, sexual identity, and where you live, where you was born. So lots of things. I know that there are lots of information on this screen, and I don't wanna that you read that, but just to make one more time perspective of how the intersectionality acts and why the lack of intersectionality make our fights very limited. So when we decided to implement the intersectionality in everything we speak, in everything we plan, and with everything we act, we have a more legitimate perspective of the problem, and also how can we address that. And so the intersectionality to speak about climate change shows us that it's a justice problem, and it's a justice perspective. So I love this image, and I will always put effort to explain how the intersectionality it's limited some opportunities, and also making the oppressions that we experience in the society work together and make things worse, and making people die first and in a worse way. This is the challenge of climate injustice. And when we look to the world, this is a perspective ahead, so we can clearly see who are the most responsible for the climate change and who will suffer right now. You can see like 2 words right here, the global north and the global south, and we can see how the impact is a very injustice, very unfair. And this is a perspective for ahead, but right now we already have some numbers. The global north is responsible for 92% of the emissions. And so how they are trying to reparating, how are they putting effort to reparating all the damage and all the climate impacts and problems that they are causing, especially for the global south. So this is for me, it's a very good picture, big picture of our future. And right now, it's not just long-term conversation, because we already saw, we already feel, and we already can show evidence and database about what's going on in terms of this disproportionality. So climate justice is about disproportionality, how this disproportional is making lives and routines and realities make feel worse, and go maybe sometimes limiting the future of these communities and vulnerable population, marginalized population. And so I'm not sure about what images and concepts and situations come to your mind when you think about Brazil? So there are lots of stereotypes about our culture. There are lots of assumptions about Brazilians and also about Brazilian politics. But today I just want to introduce you some small scenarios of what's going on in my home country. And I like to introduce Brazil as many countries in just one, because we have a rich cultural diversity and rich multiple ethnicity and a huge population, and each region, and I'm gonna share better here for you. So I'm from Rio in the northeast, in the southeast, sorry, and we have 27 states, and all these states, 26 states, sorry, and all these states, there are different climate challenge. But maybe what comes sometimes first in our mind is the Amazon region that stays here in the North region, and the Amazon regions that catch the international attention for lots of challenges with forests and with the indigenous population, and how right now this year the Southeast suffer with lots of climate disasters as floods and landslides, and also all the things that are happening in my state, in my city. And I'm gonna share with you. The social inequality in Brazil maybe is one of our first problems, because we had a very rich population, and at the same time poor people that are the most bigger population. This picture is from Copacabana Beach, and you can see behind these buildings what we call favelas, that are slums, is equivalent to slums. The favelas is a very important phenomenon in Brazil, because it shows us the reality of millions of people. So in terms of statistics, just 8% of Brazilian population lives in favelas. And when I say live in favela, there are lots of complexities behind that. Because when you live in favela, you are able to live lots and lots of violation of your basic rights. So people in favela sometimes doesn't have access to the energy, doesn't have access to the clean water, doesn't have access to a safe space, because favelas are struggling with the policy in terms of marginalization. So in one city, less than 1 mile, you can see a city, in the same city in Rio de Janeiro, you can see these buildings in front of the beach. So it's a wealth area. And behind that, you have a favela. So this is a very good metaphor what Brazil is. You can have in less than 1 mile, lots of different economic realities, and what causes lots of different conflicts. At the same time, we have extreme violence. And there is a data that says that every 23 minutes, a young Black guy dies. A young Black person dies. And when I heard the first time about this perspective, this estimative, maybe it was 4 years ago. And every year, we still have the same statistic, because the Black population is more about to die and suffer against the policy. So this is a structural problem that shapes our culture and shapes our home country reality. And also climate disasters. And I just want to catch your attention for what happened in the last 2 months. Petropolis is a very wealthy city in Rio de Janeiro. It's based on the mountains. And over there, every year, every summer that goes from December to March, there are lots of landslides. There are lots of disaster regarding to the nature. But the thing is, the city hall was already aware about this problem, about the risks that the population was suffering, but nothing was done to prevent. Nothing was done to move and provide a migration of the population that lived in these landslides areas risk. So this year, again, in February, we lost lots of families. We lost lots of people, kids, women, because of the floods again. It was a very terrible scenario. I could follow from here, lots of videos and lots of news. And again, so why our governments didn't do anything? So what justified that? And one of the features that I read was saying about environmental racism, because when you are aware about the problem, you don't address a solution, putting in risk lots of peoples. We have environmental racism issue. But the thing is, most of the people that died in the Petropolis tragedy were Black, were women, were poor, so were vulnerable, because Petropolis is a very wealthy city, as I saw. So the areas that were suffering and the houses that was destructed by the floods and by this landslide, they have a color, they have a gender, and they have a class. So it's not just a coincidence. There is a project of society that doesn't care for this population in Brazil, doesn't care for this population in Rio, that every year struggles against some climate challenge and climate disaster. At the same time, in March, we have another flood, terrible flood in Angra dos Reis, and different from Petropolis that I said before. Angra dos Reis, it's literal area. It's an area for so many beautiful beaches and so many beautiful views. And every year too, they suffer with flood. And this year was, I would say, was worse because more people died and we destroyed some reserves, natural reserves with these landslides. And finally, I just chose this image in Rio because this is a place that I already visit. It's very close to where I did my university. And over here, you can see, again, one more disaster that happened in the beginning of April. So we are just watching day by day some disaster regarding mostly floods in the southeast that we could prevent with a mitigation and adaptation plan. But what is happening right now, that's climate injustice that I'm saying that has a color and that has a race and has a gender and has a class impact every year, they are not being in the center of the climate action plans. For lots of times, we were just talking about climate disasters and climate perspectives without bringing the intersectionalities for our preventions. And when we see that all these disasters, they have a standard, and the people that are being affected also have a standard. So how can we shape our climate action plans considering the racism and also considering all the things that makes this population that I'm sharing with you today being the most affected and has less resource to recover themselves, to recover their house. There is no, for example, any political action or political public policy that allow these people to stay in a safe place after a disaster. So, and what is, as a consequence, we see lots of people without housing after climate disaster, and also losing everything they have. And so sometimes when we talk about climate challenge in Brazil, it's a very common question to hear. We are struggling for the basic rights. We are struggling for safety. We are struggling for food. So how can we care about climate change if I don't have what to eat right now? And so it's a great question, because if we still are here, this question is because the population maybe didn't understand that climate change is about everything. It's about what we eat and how our safety is it's insurance or not. So how can we invest in climate education for the population, that they are empowered by the information and also empowered to fight for public policy that put their reality, the vulnerable realities, in the center. So everything I'm saying about this last climate disaster, I just want to highlight that 54% of the population in Brazil is Black. And it's a very a strong number, because when you see the climate space, and it's not so difficult to identify that, you will see most white people deciding our future. And this disproportionality about representations affects us directly in the public policy that we are trying to shape or not, or to fight, to propose, to suggest, and to bring in a national level, in a political level. So if 54% of the population in Brazil is Black, what are the people? What are these voices when we are discussing climate action plans in local and national level? So, and just a personal perspectives. Also, when I started to work with climate change some years ago, I was very impressed at how these spaces exclude some perspectives, because it's a space that scientists are welcome, and academic people are welcome, and they are very welcome because they really need them to provide data and evidence. But where are the frontline people that they need also being there, not just reporting disaster, but also proposing solutions and proposing the local, showing the local reality. So this it's like a middle. Now, what we are seeing, it's not the ideal, and this reality remains year by year, month by month. So how can we shift to this in a disruptive way? Because in this sense, we cannot advance. This is not climate justice. And in terms of the Amazon region, I just want to share with you, if you don't know, today is a very special day to Brazil, because we are celebrating the Indigenous National Indigenous Day. Actually, the name is National Indian Day, but the indigenous population in Brazil is trying to change this name and replacing for Indigenous People Day, because to say about Indian Day brings lots of stereotype, and everybody start to say Happy Indian Day. And what the indigenous population is trying to fight right now is to show, to shift to the name, the way to say, and also bring this day to use this day to raise lots of awareness about the situation of the indigenous population in Brazil, and also the social environmental challenge that they are facing, not just in the Amazon, but in different places of the Brazil. And the Amazon region occupies 59% of the Brazilian territory. It's a lot. Actually, I've never been to Amazon yet. It's a very expensive trip and a very long trip to be there. But to give you a sense of geography, so it's composed by 9 states, and there is 2 realities when we speak about Amazon region. There is a reality of the urban Amazon region, so people that lives in cities and faces different perspectives, and also people that lives in rural areas. And but what I want to share with you today, it's like how the Amazon region is also a Black space of lots of Black people that came to the Amazon, and they are still there, and they are cultivating there lots of traditional solutions for climate change. And this is a project, the name is Black Amazon in a short translation, and a photographer, she took lots of pictures of people from Amazon, but Black people, because when we look to the Amazon, the first image that comes sometimes just the indigenous population. And there is also beyond the indigenous population that are waiting for lots of investments from the government, and they're suffering also lots of violence, because when we try to protect their territories, there are lots of challenge in terms of protection the Amazon. But also we have a Black population in Brazil, and this population, as in the rest of the country, are facing racism are facing a lack of investments for their houses, for the climate disaster. So there is a Black Amazon, and the Amazon is shouting all the year against the deforestation and against lots of illegal actions that happens there because of our natural resources. But there are also Indigenous and Black voices trying to show how their solutions against climate change also it's a type of resistance to show how the nature and their knowledge can also contribute against climate change. And it's impossible to think about Brazilian Amazon without considering the significant presence of Black folk, many of them young and in vulnerable living conditions. I had the privilege to go to the COP26 last year. It was based in Scotland. And over there, we had for the first time a very huge delegation composed by people from Amazon, so Indigenous population, youth, and Black people. It was my second conference, global climate conference, but what I will never forget how was for me to see lots of different voices over there, and not just bring the problems, but also trying to propose dialogues about possible political solutions. It was in times of pandemic, it was a very great achievement, because it was the first time in the history of Brazil that we were able to bring a very diverse delegation to a space, a climate space, a global climate space. So this is a picture of our march in Glasgow, and the message that we shouted, that we shared, and we didn't stop to say in all days. The the climate conference, it's composed by 14 days, 14, 15. It was that climate justice without racial justice is the new colonialism. And I'm sure that you already heard about this before today in this event, but how in terms of trying to propose new ways to address and to take the climate change, sometimes we are just reproducing some ways of colonialism, because if this topic and if this reality is dominated by a group, a privileged, a group that they are privileged. So how we are just to reinforce one more oppression trying to address climate justice. So here in this picture, this is an activist from Brazil. His name is Douglas, and he was responsible to take some topics about the Maroon communities in Brazil, and also favelas population, and also Indigenous population, Black and Black people in Amazon, to the Brazil Climate Action Hub. Brazil Climate Action Hub was our space that we promote dialogues and also discuss it with lots of sectors. So we could organize a dialogue between the private sector and the non-profit sector. At the same time, a governmental representatives was there. So we tried to mix lots of stakeholders to speak this climate justice without racial justice. It's a new colonialism. So what solution do you have knowing about this? And so almost going to the end, I want to show this. I really believe that images are a powerful way to communicate climate change. And I'm not aware if you know about this case. It happened in 2019, and we had a very important economic forum in Davos, and this is a picture, the original picture that was took, and this was the picture that was published. And as you can see, this is Vanessa Nakei. She's an activist from Uganda, and she when she arrived at home and she just saw this picture, she asked, oh, what's going on? I was in this picture. Why the photographer cropped me out of this picture? And you can see here Greta and other very important activists, white activists, but the picture that was published was this with Vanessa being cutted. And this is a very good metaphor again, that what happens with Black bodies in climate change space. Because when the photographer, someone asked the photographer, why you did that? Why you crop it out Vanessa and Kate? And he said, I'm sorry, it was not intentional. I just cropped her out to compose better the picture. And we are all aware there is a name for that. And when Vanessa realized that and she published that, she became famous, her voice became famous. Unfortunately, after this episode, but hopefully she was able to write a book that I highly recommend you. The name is The Bigger Picture, that of course she says about this episode, but this is not what the book is about. The book is about Black voices, especially in Africa continent, how the activism and how the global South are mobilizing themselves about climate change and climate justice. So Vanessa is one of my greatest inspirations, and she was at the COP26 too. She was at the COP25. So she's a great young voice that it's showing us about representativeness, because what we have previously was Greta. Greta is a very also inspiration for lots of young people across the world, but sometimes we have to realize all the privilege that Greta has and Vanessa doesn't have. So how these both activists, they are fighting for the same issue, climate justice, but from different spaces, from different geographies. So Vanessa and Kate, it's our good example of climate justice activists. And this is the picture of the Paris Agreement. And again, how one image can be stronger in the message. Here you can see a very strong lack of representations. And this, we are talking about the Paris Agreement in 2015, one of the most important agreements we did for the climate change. So it was a historical moment. And here, if you want to count with me, so we can see a space again, very dominated by men. And you can see some women here, you can see Indigenous representative here, but it's clear that there is a problem of representation. And let's go to the numbers. The UNFCCC, they published some numbers, and we have 12,000 men and just 5.9 women that was in the conference. And in terms of the Paris Agreement and the climate conference, they are divided by negotiators who can take the decision, and also the observers. So between the observers women were less than 43%. So the decision make was very unbalanced. So we can see in this picture, that's a very good metaphor again, as the Vanessa, how we still have to shift the climate change in terms of gender and in terms of race. And this was like a very historical moment 7 years ago, but not too different if we compare to now. So I said lots of perspectives here today, and what I want to try to conclude with you together is how we still are fighting against some conceptions and assumptions of justice. Justice can mean lots of different things, because when we look to the environmental challenge, we see that we have an incarceration problem. Depends on the culture, climate change, it's raising the number of girls that they are getting married early because they are running away from their countries, and sometimes their parents give them to be married and to have back money. So lots of different problems and terrible situations regarding the climate. And what's clear for all of us is that climate change and climate shows us how it's a social justice issue, and how the impact is disproportional in a disproportionate way are a social justice issue. And when recognizing that we can advancing in terms of who is being behind, who is being behind in terms of voices, because if we don't make intentional effort to put these voices in a center way, and not just for here, but to shape the solutions too, we are in the same place. And the way that I want to end my presentation with you is just showing some voice that matters to climate change in Brazil from the Amazon region, and how recognize then we can maybe reimagine a sustainable future with other colors and other genders, and also other types of scenarios for all of us, for not just Brazil, because Brazil is the biggest place, the biggest country of Latin America. They have lots of influence to the other countries, but in terms of climate change and in terms of climate policy, we are very behind, because our president, he is a denier in terms of climate change. So he doesn't believe and he doesn't invest. And since he took place 4 years ago, this year is an election year. So we have lots of losses, environmental losses. And our scenario about to plan against the disasters also were very affected by his management as a president. So dreaming with a Brazil without Bolsonaro, that's the current president, how can we put these voices first in terms of pathways, hope, and perspectives for the climate justice? So I wanna play here, and I hope you are able to hear with me.
Tempo que eu era jovem, era a floresta vivo, verde. Então a água, na época que eu entendi, era diferente, era verde, né? Nós, quando era jovem, a gente frechava peixe de frecha.
Eu, como jovem, vejo como tudo mudou desde a época do meu pai. Não conseguimos mais ver o peixe que antigamente era flechado, porque o rio está totalmente sujo.
No momento que começaram essas atividades de garimpo, a cor da água mudou.
Hoje em dia, o que a gente mais vê é o desmatamento descontrolado na Amazônia. As queimadas estão destruindo tudo.
Cada vez que aumenta a desmatação, a gente vê a mudança climática também.
Está tudo mudado, o clima está descontrolado, o rio está cada vez mais secando.
E mesmo com esse governo, ele fala que ele não vai demarcar nem 1 centímetro de terra, né? Com isso, as invasões estão entrando, com a fala do presidente Bolsonaro, né? Os grandes ameaças que nós vemos hoje, que são hidrelétrica, né? O ferro-grão, é tanto as atividades de garimpeira, né? Madeireiro, sojeiro, né? os fazendeiros, criadores, né? E aí quem estão sofrendo, quem quer cuidar do meio ambiente, né? Que somos nós, somos protetor da floresta e a gente não está dando conta de preservar essa floresta. E a floresta, ela é importante para o nosso futuro e é importante para os animais que vivem dentro da casa dela. Nós percebemos que a floresta, ela é a vida de todos nós, do ser humano. Ela salva a vida da humanidade, é por isso que nós temos muito respeito com a floresta.
Existimos e resistimos protegendo a Amazônia. Estamos fazendo a nossa parte.
E vocês?
Não é só nós povos indígenas que dependemos da Amazônia. Você também depende. Venha fazer parte dessa luta.
So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much again. And I look forward if you have some questions and some thoughts and reflections. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was really amazing. That was really, really, really incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have a lot of questions, but I would love for students or other people to share their comments or questions first, I guess.
Don't be shy. We're an intimate group, so if you want to unmute and talk, or you can write your comments or questions in the chat. Andrea, you gave us so much information and so much context. I really thank you for that.
Thank you.
I can get us started. I have a question. I learned a little bit about kind of what got you activated to look into these issues or to pursue this as your profession, for your profession. Was there a particular environmental disaster that happened that made you want to learn more about environmental justice in Brazil, or what motivated you or inspired you to get involved with this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. And I like dates, and I cannot answer a question without reminding some dates, because in this month, I complete 4 years since I graduated my master. And one day after my defense, I did an interview to work with climate change, to work with climate communications. But the problem was in the interview, I said, I'm sorry, I don't have background in climate change. And she said, oh, great, because I need someone that come from this tract and help us how to communicate well and better the climate change, because everybody is talking about data and just like bring the scientist vocabulary, and we don't need that. We need someone that is able to transcribe the climate change for all the audiences. And so I'm happy you don't have background, but if you are willing to learn, please, the position is yours. I can't say no, because I was accepted as a beginner, and as a beginner, I could fall in love with this subject and this topic relating to the racial justice, because my master was in racial justice. So this is my story, but I grew up in a city, the name is São Gonçalo, and we had a river over there. It's a very polluted river, and it overflowed all the time when we had floods. And I can remember myself walking in the flood to go to school, to go to other places. And I asked my dad, when they will solve that. So why we have to walk in this dirty water every time, like every month? So how can we solve this? Because we don't have car, and so we have to walk on this. And I can never forget this, because every time I come back there, we still have this river without solution. So I think climate change is not an option, was not an option to work with for me. It's like a mission, thinking about the future generation. So if I'm not able to solve the problem of my neighborhood so far, so how can I ensure a future to my son, to my daughter, to my niece, to my nephew, whatever, the future generation can be lots of people. So what motivated me was that. So how can I, with the communications tools and also social justice perspectives, can raise more awareness for poor people about climate change, because it's still a topic for specific group. So how can we become this a global topic and topic for all? It's like my mission. It's what I'm working hard to. And thank you for the question.
Other people want to jump in, make any comments, or ask any more questions? I can certainly continue to ask questions.
I have a question I'm curious about. So with your particular outlook and focus on environmental justice and racial justice in Brazil, and having come to the United States almost a year now, right? Or 8 months,
10
something
months.
like that. Yeah. What have you, of course, we're also a society with a lot of racial inequity and injustice and environmental injustice. What have you noticed and learned about the US context that is either similar or different to the Brazilian context?
I think first of all, how it's easier for me sometimes to have conversations. Like I'm seeing here one of my friends that I met in Davis, Lee, and she works with food insecurity. And one of our first conversation was about climate injustice, because she leads a podcast about that. And so I feel here at first, how can I easily, sometimes depends on the people, on the context, talk about environmental injustice, and it's already very well known topic for some people. And when I look back, when I look to my country and my reality, so my family still doesn't understand what I do here or what I work with. And if my dad or my mom, they're not able to understand what I do, sometimes I can, the fault can be mine. I'm not communicating well what I'm doing or studying. But what the difference is, like the Brazilian population, they are struggling, as I said, with other concerns, and it's regarding how can we survive as a country against lots of oppressions. The first challenge that I noticed is how climate justice here sometimes it's more it's well known in terms of topic. And some schools, some parents, they shared about how climate education in some schools, they are a good topic and they are well development, depends on the school and depends on the state too. And I just learned in a formal education about climate change in the university. So what everything we learned at school and everything we learned in the high school was not enough to shape a very critical awareness about climate change and climate justice. So this is my first perspective. But also I had the chance to read some climate action plans, and I was very amazed at how, especially in Davis, that's a very sustainable city, and how it really works for this city is special, that's a very privileged city, but how California in a general way invests lots and lots of effort and money and resources to make the states and the small cities sustainable in lots of terms. So I could realize how we can achieve solutions, because the government, the city hall, they are really committed to a climate action plan that works. But of course, we have to recognize that it's a very it's a very privileged city. It's a city with resources and money, so things can happen, easily happen. So climate justice in Davis, maybe we can think critically that has other meetings, because it's the majority here is white, so, and wealth, so the challenge of the ground are not the same, because we are not struggling against the poverty, we're not struggling against other oppression. So we have to, I can't compare, but very aware that I have a very different home country reality. So
it's interesting that you bring up the comparison with Davis, because one of the green policies is basically limiting development, but limiting development also keeps prices high and keeps the city exclusive and keeps poor people out and people of color out. So it's kind of the economic reality of capitalism with racial injustice, even in terms of green policy and sustainability policy, it's kind of it's baked in. The racial injustice and class injustice is baked into that. It's really hard to kind of imagine escaping that.
Yeah. And again, I think I can see the good examples, but not being able to make just a fair comparison limits me to compare both cities like Rio de Janeiro and Davis. So I can't do that, but I can see. So a climate action plans can work when we have the support of the government, when we have like schools that works with this topic in a very good way. So it's lots of hands together making happen and successfully.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
We have about 2 or 3 minutes. Are there any of the students here that might have a question, either to unmute and ask or ask in the chat?
Yeah, thank you for everybody that said in the chat. I see maybe a Brazilian, Jonathan, he's Brazilian. He said in Portuguese. Oh, good to see you here.
I just want to say, I think that there's a lot of overlap with what's happening with the vulnerable populations in Brazil and the vulnerable populations here, in terms of the poverty being intersecting with race. It's just very similar in where we are too. Right? I live in Sacramento. I live in a historically Black neighborhood. Our issue here is air quality, right, and things like that, soil contamination. Things like that. It's not necessarily directly climate related, but other types of environmental racism, where the folks that are the most vulnerable are on the margins, right? But we're most affected by the lead contamination in our soil, in our homes, even water contamination in some of the inner cities. Especially if you look at Detroit, Michigan, and Flint, Michigan, what's happened there. So I see a lot of overlap, and I just think that it's really important, like you said, like what you've been saying, that people of color use their voices and educate each other so that we can advocate for our communities, right? So I think that's really powerful, and it's very much relatable to what's happening here, although it's on a more of a micro level here. From what I've discovered, the issue of the environment, like you said, is a high level issue, right? And people here are struggling for basic needs too. So this is not on our radar. How do we fix air quality? I mean, people think that that's impossible to do, right? And it's not impossible. It's just going to take a lot of time and education and working together, right? Because, like you said, this is we're all sharing this land and this space. We're just delaying the death, delaying it um, for the future. So thank you for everything that you said and shared, and very inspirational work that you're doing. And I'm sure that it's probably pretty hard, right, to get heard in Brazil because of the neglect, generations of neglecting 54% of its population, right? That's going to take time.
Yeah, and I think you ended with a very great conclusion, because the solution is just it's not just one, and it's not like we cannot discuss just one point, but as much we can make more people aware and more people together in different levels, knowing about the problem and advocating, not just in the street, but in different spaces of the society, Brazilian society. We are a little bit closer of a sustainable future, because we are very far right now. And so thank you so much for promoting this space to make this voice more louder. And as a Brazilian, I really appreciated the space to speak about my country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you, Alex, and everyone for attending. And clearly, we have to have Andrea back in person next time if she.
Yeah, I really hope so. I really hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Riyadh, too. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very, bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.